When Shaquille O'Neal walked down the jet bridge at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, at 6:18 on a Wednesday morning in February, he was not dressed like a man worth $400 million. Black sweatpants, with the elastic going at one ankle, a dark navy hoodie pulled halfway up, a baseball cap pulled low. The same Timberlands he had worn the day before. No watch, no chain, no bodyguard, just a worn leather backpack on one shoulder and a boarding pass folded twice in his hand. The cabin smelled, when he stepped through the door, like recirculated coffee, the faint chemical sweetness of a recently cleaned carpet, and that particular cold layer of air that hangs in a plane before the engines fully warm. First class was already half full. A small flight attendant in a Navy uniform with neat gray-streaked hair pinned tightly back was standing in the galley, holding a tablet, and the moment Shaq stepped past the cockpit door, her eyes locked onto him, and something shifted in her face that he had seen before. Her name tag read Caroline. She was 58. She had been an attendant for 31 years. She had not been sleeping well for the last 11 nights, and Shaquille O'Neal walked toward seat 2A and said absolutely nothing. He noticed the first thing before he reached his seat. A small enamel pin on Caroline's lapel, just below her name tag, the kind grandmothers wear, shaped like a tiny basketball with a number stitched in the corner that he could not quite read from the aisle. He noticed the second thing as he passed row 1, a worn paperback book wedged into the seat back pocket across the aisle, a legal thriller, with a yellow library receipt sticking out as a bookmark, dated 3 weeks earlier, addressed to a name on the receipt that ended in Reeves. He noticed the third thing when Caroline reached up to close an overhead bin 2 rows ahead. Her left hand on the bin handle was trembling slightly. Not from age, from the kind of tired that has been building for a while. He noticed the fourth thing on the folded napkin she had left on her jump seat behind the galley curtain. A pencil-drawn calendar grid with 11 X marks in a row, and one circled date 3 days out, and a single word written under the circle that he could only see for half a second before he turned the corner. The word looked like sentencing. Shaq did not stop walking. He filed it all away. He sat down in seat 2A and put his backpack at his feet and said absolutely nothing. Now here is the part nobody on that plane understood yet. Here is the secret Shaquille O'Neal had been carrying for the last 7 months. The thing the small woman with the trembling hand had absolutely no idea about as she watched him settle into seat 2A. One single phone call Shaq had made in July of the previous year to a defense attorney in Decatur, Georgia, had set in motion a quiet arrangement that had been running ever since, with implications that touched a juvenile detention facility, a public defender's office understaffed for 9 years, and a boy whose last name was Reeves. What was about to happen in the front of that cabin would not be settled by money or by airline rules. It would be settled by a single boarding pass, by a name Caroline did not know Shaq knew, and by a court date 3 days away that she had been counting on a paper napkin behind a galley curtain at 6 in the morning. Stay with us for the whole video, because what you are about to see is not a story about a flight attendant humiliating a basketball player. It is a story about a woman whose grandson's whole future was scheduled for a Friday morning. And the moment 2 lives running on completely separate tracks were revealed to have been on the same track all along. He was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1972. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, was a small woman who held 2 full-time jobs and never once let her son believe that smallness and softness were the same word. She taught him a sentence when he was 8, standing in the boarding line of a Greyhound bus in Newark when a driver had snapped at her about a ticket that was perfectly valid. Lucille did not raise her voice, she did not roll her eyes, she did not embarrass anybody. She simply leaned down to her son, with both her hands on his shoulders, and she said, "Baby, you remember this. When somebody decides who you are before you have opened your mouth, you don't argue with the decision. You let the day make the decision instead. Days are honest. People are not always." He was 8. He never forgot a word of it. His biological father was absent, and into that space stepped a man named Philip Harrison, a sergeant in the United States Army who married Lucille and became, in every way that mattered, Shaq's father. Philip had one rule he said so often it stopped being a sentence and became weather. He said it driving to school. He said it after games. He said it the night before Shaq left for LSU, the morning of the NBA draft, and in the hospital the year before he died. Don't be a reaction. Be a response. Philip said it the way other men say grace. Philip Harrison is the ghost of this story. He has been gone almost 5 years, and there is not a single room Shaq enters that Philip is not standing in. LSU. Drafted first overall by the Orlando Magic in 1992. 3 championships in a row with the Lakers and 1 more with Miami. A doctorate in education. A life that on paper looks like a fairy tale and in person looks like a man who still flies coast to coast in sweatpants because his mother always told him a man who forgets where he started will forget who he is. 7 months ago, he had read a long article in a regional paper about a 16-year-old boy in Atlanta charged as an adult for a crime he had not committed alone. The boy's public defender had not returned the reporter's calls. Shaq had read the article twice. Then he had picked up the phone. Caroline Reeves was 58. She had been a flight attendant for 31 years. She had raised 2 children mostly on her own after her husband died of a heart attack at 39. Her daughter Renee had died of an overdose 6 years ago in a hotel room in Birmingham. Caroline had been the one who got the call. Renee had left behind one son, a boy named Marcus Reeves, who had been 10 at the time. Caroline had been raising him ever since. Marcus was now 16. He read paperbacks. He wanted to be a marine biologist. Last June, on a hot Saturday night in southwest Atlanta, Marcus had been in the passenger seat of a car driven by an older boy he knew from school, and that older boy had pulled into a gas station and gone inside with a gun, and had come out 2 minutes later with $300 and a clerk who had been hit hard enough to lose 2 teeth. Marcus had not known the gun was in the car. Marcus had not gotten out. Marcus had not driven. But Marcus had been in the car. He had been charged as an adult under a Georgia statute he did not understand, and the public defender's office had been 6 months behind, and Caroline had not slept properly since the indictment came down in August. The sentencing was on Friday. She had spent the last 11 nights doing the math the way frightened grandmothers do, calculating how long she could keep working if Marcus went away for the upper end of the range, what she would do with his books, who would feed his fish. She had finished the math at 3 in the morning, and the number had not been kind. She had come into the galley already in a place she could not climb out of by herself. When she had looked up and seen a very tall black man in a hoodie and sweatpants walk into her first-class cabin with no watch and no jewelry, something in her had reached for a small piece of control in a day that had given her none. She decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that this man was going to be the place she put down something she had been carrying for 11 nights. She walked over to seat 2A. She said the words before she even fully decided to say them. The second they left her mouth, she knew. Across the aisle from Shaq in seat 2B was an older white woman named Helen Vosberg, 76, a retired surgeon, holding her reading glasses in her lap and a folded New York Times she had not yet opened. Behind him in seat 3A was a young man in a charcoal suit, 28, named Devon Park, who had recognized Shaq the moment he sat down and had pulled his phone halfway out of his pocket and then thought better of it. In the galley behind the curtain stood a younger flight attendant named Kayla, 26, 6 weeks into the job, who had been mentored by Caroline and had never once seen her like this. Within 4 minutes of Shaq settling into seat 2A and pulling a paperback out of his backpack, Caroline had walked over with her tablet and stopped in the aisle next to him, and tilted her head the way people tilt their heads when they have already decided the outcome of a conversation that has not begun. Half the cabin heard her say, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "Sir, boarding pass, now." Shaq handed it to her without looking up. She glanced at the pass. She glanced at him. She glanced at the pass again. Then she said, loud enough for every seat in first class to hear, "Sir, this is first class. People like you don't fly first class. There must be a mistake. You will need to gather your things and move back to the main cabin." Helen Vosberg's reading glasses stopped moving in her lap. Devon Park's phone came halfway out of his pocket again. Kayla, in the galley behind the curtain, put one hand over her mouth. For a long moment, nothing in the cabin moved. The smell of the coffee got sharper the way smells do when a room goes quiet. The seatbelt sign chimed once, and the sound seemed louder than it should have. Shaq looked at his boarding pass in Caroline's hand. He looked at her face. He did not say a word. He took the boarding pass back, slowly. He looked briefly at the small enamel pin on her lapel. He looked briefly at the curtain behind which the napkin with the 11 X marks was sitting. He looked briefly at the trembling in her left hand, and then he reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and took out a folded sheet of paper that was not a boarding pass, and he set it on the tray table without unfolding it, and he said very quietly, in the voice his mother had used in a Greyhound line in Newark 40 years ago, "Ma'am, I would like to keep my seat. Could you ask the captain to come back here for a moment, please?" Caroline's mouth opened slightly. Devon Park's phone was all the way out. But before you hear what happened next, you need to feel the full weight of what came before it, because what is about to happen in seat 2A is not a small thing, and the small thing it pretends to be is the disguise the large thing always wears. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire first-class cabin held its breath. Caroline's smile did not drop immediately. That is the worst part. It hung there for almost 2 full seconds before her brain caught up with her face. She said, with a small, forced laugh, "Sir, the captain doesn't come back to first class for boarding disputes." Shaq did one quiet thing. He unfolded the paper exactly once, just enough for her to see the letterhead at the top and one signature line at the bottom, then refolded it without showing the rest, and handed it to her. She took it. The letterhead was the airline's own. It was a memorandum dated 4 months earlier informing senior flight crew of a new minority stakeholder in the parent holding company, and the signature at the bottom was Shaq's. Caroline Reeves did not speak. She read the page twice. Her hands started shaking, both of them now. Helen Vosberg in 2B closed her eyes briefly. Then Shaq did the thing nobody on that plane was ready for. He did not raise his voice. He did not press a flight attendant call button. He looked up at Caroline and said, in a voice gentler than anyone expected, "Ma'am, what's your last name?" Her mouth went dry. She said, "Reeves." Shaq nodded slowly. "And your grandson's name is Marcus." It was not a question. Caroline did not answer. She could not. He said it again. "Your grandson's name is Marcus. He is 16. His sentencing is Friday at 9 in the morning at the Fulton County Juvenile Justice Center. He has been assigned a new attorney named Mr. Holloway, paid for by a foundation you do not have on file, who has been preparing for this hearing for 7 months. I have been on that case since July." Caroline Reeves, who had not cried at work in 22 years, put one hand on the back of seat 2A to steady herself. The folded paper in her other hand began to shake so visibly that Shaq reached up and took it from her and set it back on his tray table. The cabin did not move. Helen Vosberg, who had been a pediatric surgeon at Grady Memorial for 31 years, slowly stood up from 2B and stepped into the aisle and put one hand on Caroline's elbow without saying a word. Devon Park's phone was no longer in his hand. Kayla had come out from behind the galley curtain. Shaq did not stand up. He said very quietly, still in seat 2A, "I read the article last July. I made a call. The new attorney is real. The foundation is real. The work has been happening for 7 months without your name on any paperwork. You will get a call this afternoon when you land from Mr. Holloway, who has been trying to reach you for 3 weeks through the wrong number on file. I am giving you the correct one now." He took out a small piece of paper from his backpack, already prepared, and handed it to her. He said the thing that, 4 days later, would be the most screenshotted 6-second clip on the internet for a week. In a voice almost gentle, he said, "Ma'am, the day is honest. People are not always. The day is honest." Caroline Reeves broke, not in a small way, in the way grown women break when they have been holding something with both hands for 11 nights, and somebody else has finally reached out and taken the weight. Helen Vosberg's hand on her elbow tightened. Kayla had silent tears running down her face. Devon Park, in 3A, was already typing one word into a draft email to a colleague. Witnessed. Shaq did one last thing before takeoff. He stood up from seat 2A, which he was easily a foot too tall for, and he walked the 3 steps to the galley with Caroline, and he said quietly, "Ma'am, the job today is to get this plane to LaGuardia. Marcus is fine. Marcus is going to be fine. Mr. Holloway will call you at 1:15 Eastern. Take the call." He turned to Kayla. "You take care of her today. There will be a note in your file by Monday that says Captain Commendation. You earned it just by standing there." He turned to Helen Vosberg, still holding Caroline's elbow. "Ma'am, thank you. There are not many like you left." He sat back down in seat 2A. He pulled his hoodie up. He opened his book. The plane pushed back from the gate 4 minutes late. Nobody complained. So what did everybody on that plane learn that morning? A flight attendant learned that the worst 11 nights of your life are not a permission slip to put them down on a stranger's tray table, and that the day is sometimes more honest than the morning you walked into it. A retired pediatric surgeon named Helen Vosberg learned that the 31 years she had spent standing next to other people's tragedies in green scrubs had been training for one more moment in a navy blazer at 6 in the morning. A young flight attendant named Kayla learned that the woman mentoring her was a grandmother carrying a Friday morning court date she had never mentioned. A young man in 3A named Devon Park learned that the best stories are the ones you put your phone down for. A 16-year-old boy named Marcus Reeves, asleep in a bunk, learned nothing yet. He would learn his part on Friday at 9. And a man in black sweatpants and an old hoodie learned, again, what his stepfather had told him so many times it had stopped being a sentence and become weather. Don't be a reaction, be a response. He had not been a reaction in seat 2A. He had been a response, and his mother was standing somewhere in the back of his mind in a Greyhound line in Newark in 1980 with her hands on his shoulders. When somebody decides who you are before you have opened your mouth, you don't argue with the decision. You let the day make the decision. Days are honest. People are not always. He had let the day. The day had been honest. He never forgot. And neither should you. If this story moved you tonight, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button so the algorithm shows this story to one more person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because this is what we do here. We tell the stories where the quiet ones win. The next video in your queue is the one about the lawyer who refused to take Shaq's case and lived to regret it. We will see you there. Paste your script.